While the world is placing more trust in modern medicine than ever before, the deadliest flu pandemic in history revealed a truth that very few people know. The treatment method that saved the most lives did not come from a laboratory. It wasn't manufactured. It wasn't patented. It grew in the wild. No one controlled it. No one owned it. And almost no one paid attention to it. A plant that today, most people would simply walk past or pull out without a second thought. Something we call a weed. So the question is, if something that simple once helped humanity survive a global pandemic, why did it disappear from modern medicine? My name is William. I am 70 years old this year. This plant is called Boneset, a strange name and not impressive at all. It grows in places people rarely notice, along streams, at the edges of forests, in marshy land all year round. Its stem is tall and slender. Small white flowers grow in clusters. Its leaves wrap tightly around the stem, making it look like the stem pierces through the leaves. At a glance, it looks like any other weed. Nothing remarkable. No value. At least, that's how we see it today. But hundreds of years ago, Native Americans saw something completely different. When fever struck, when the body ached as if the bones were breaking from within, they used it. Not because of tradition, but because it truly worked. Through many generations, this knowledge was passed down, quietly, precisely, and reliably. Before modern medicine existed, Boneset was a part of survival. What makes this story even more unbelievable is that you can completely grow Boneset yourself. No special equipment needed, no advanced knowledge required, and definitely no laboratory. Boneset is not a demanding plant. It thrives best in places where many other plants struggle. Moist soil, even slightly waterlogged conditions, areas near streams, along ponds, or places where water lingers after rain. That is its ideal environment. When it comes to light, Boneset doesn't need harsh sunlight. It prefers gentle light, partial sunlight during the day, under light tree cover, or in gardens that are not too dry or hot. Under the right conditions, the plant can grow from 1 to 1, 5 meters tall. Its stem is straight, slender, but strong enough to stand through multiple seasons. And more importantly, this is a perennial plant. You don't need to replant it every year, just once. After that, it will come back on its own, year after year. It requires little care, no chemical fertilizers, no constant intervention. In some cases, it can even spread on its own, gently, quietly. That is exactly why today, many people call it a weed, because it grows without permission. It doesn't need to be planted in rows. It doesn't need to be managed. It exists on its own terms. But that very trait was once Boneset's greatest advantage. In the past, when people didn't have pharmacies on every corner, a plant that could grow on its own, easy to find and always available, was a survival advantage. No need to buy it, no waiting, no dependence on any system. You just needed to know where it was and how to use it. That is why what is now called a weed was once an essential part of how people survived illness. By the late 19th century, Boneset was not an obscure remedy. It was widely used, not only by the general public, but also by a group of formally trained doctors. They were known as eclectic physicians. These doctors did not rely on a single system. They combined knowledge from multiple sources: native herbal medicine, European medicine, practical experience from years of treating patients, and Boneset was one of the plants they used regularly. But in the early 20th century, a major shift began to take place. Modern medicine gradually moved toward a laboratory-based model: standardization, measurement, control. This was an important advancement, but at the same time, it created a clear boundary. Methods that did not fit the new model began to be excluded. In 1910, a highly influential report was published. known as the Flexner Report. The goal of this report was to evaluate the quality of medical schools in the United States and Canada. As a result, a large number of schools teaching natural and herbal medicine were closed. Not all of them were low quality, but many did not meet the new standards in terms of facilities, laboratories, and teaching methods based on modern scientific models. Over time, medical training programs focused almost entirely on pharmaceuticals. Plant-based treatments were gradually removed from the official curriculum. What's important to understand is this was not a single decision. It was the result of a systemic transformation, a system that prioritized what could be measured, what could be manufactured, and what could be controlled. Meanwhile, plants like Boneset did not fit this model. They grow naturally, they cannot be fully standardized, and they are difficult to produce as uniform products at scale. In addition, another practical factor existed. Compounds found in plants are often difficult to protect exclusively in the same way synthetic pharmaceuticals can be. That affects the incentive to invest in research and development. Over time, as new generations of doctors were trained without exposure to older knowledge, plants like Boneset were no longer used, not because they were proven ineffective, but simply because they were no longer part of the system. And when something is no longer taught, it gradually disappears from practice. In 1918, a flu pandemic broke out and rapidly spread across the world. This was not an ordinary outbreak. Young, healthy individuals began to die within days, sometimes within hours. Cities were overwhelmed. Hospitals ran out of space. Medical staff worked non-stop. And in that chaos, doctors were forced to choose how to treat patients. On one side was the modern approach, based on medications that were widely used at the time, especially aspirin, often given in high doses. On the other side were doctors who maintained older approaches. They used herbal treatments, including Boneset. This was not a pre-designed experiment. There were no controlled laboratories, no standardized protocols. It was simply reality unfolding at the same time. Two approaches, the same disease, the same context, and the outcomes began to show differences. Some physicians using herbal methods documented their results. Large numbers of patients, continuously observed, and lower mortality rates compared to many reports from conventional treatments. These numbers were not widely publicized. They did not become the standard, but they existed in the records of that time. What matters here is not to claim one method as absolutely correct, but to recognize something simple. Within the same crisis, multiple approaches existed, and some of them were based on very simple things, like a plant growing in the wild. When data from that period was compiled, a difference began to emerge. Very clear, very hard to ignore. In many reports using conventional treatment methods, mortality rates reached around 3 out of 100 patients. This figure was recorded in multiple medical documents at the time. But in some groups of physicians using herbal approaches, including Boneset, the results were different, significantly. In a survey conducted after the pandemic, some reports showed mortality rates of only about 6 out of 1,000 patients. Pause for a moment. 3 out of 100, compared to 6 out of 1,000. Not a small gap, but a difference by several times. One side was considered modern, the other was seen as outdated. But in reality, the outcomes did not fully follow what people expected. However, one thing must be clearly understood. These numbers come from observational reports, not modern clinical trials. No absolute conclusions can be made, but they are enough to raise an important question. If a method this simple could produce better outcomes in some cases, why wasn't it studied more deeply? And why did it almost completely disappear? After the pandemic, a question began to emerge, not immediately, But years later, some researchers started to re-examine treatments used in 1918, especially the use of aspirin. At that time, aspirin was recommended at very high doses, much higher than what is considered safe today. In some cases, doses reached several grams per day. This led to a possibility, not certainty, but a notable hypothesis that some of the severe complications may not have come only from the virus, but could also be linked to side effects of the treatment itself. One issue that has been mentioned is fluid buildup in the lungs, making breathing more difficult. Some descriptions from autopsy reports of that time show similarities to this condition. However, it must be clearly stated, this is not a final conclusion. It is a scientific hypothesis, still debated, still requiring more evidence. But it offers a different perspective that in a major crisis, how we treat patients can also influence the outcome. And that makes the differences between approaches more worth thinking about, especially when compared to simpler methods, less invasive approaches, like the use of traditional herbal remedies. It took nearly a century for modern science to seriously return to studying boneset. Not in the United States, but in Europe. In the 1980s, several studies focused on the compounds found in this plant. The results showed boneset contains polysaccharides. These are compounds that can influence the immune system. In laboratory experiments, these compounds demonstrated the ability to stimulate immune responses. Simply put, they may help the body respond better when facing pathogens, not by directly destroying them, but by supporting the body's natural defense system. After that, further studies continued. Some compounds in boneset were found to have anti-inflammatory properties. This aligns with how it was used in the past, when people used it to reduce fever and relieve body aches. By the 2000s, scientists began to go deeper. They were no longer just asking, does it work? But how does it work? Some studies in cell environments showed extracts from boneset may affect how viruses attach to cells. That means it may act at a very early stage of infection, before the virus has a chance to replicate. However, it must be emphasized, most of these findings come from laboratory studies, not enough to confirm treatment effectiveness in humans by modern standards. But they are important because they provide something that did not exist before, a scientific explanation for what had been observed long ago. Those who used boneset in the past did not know about polysaccharides, did not know about immune responses, did not know about viral mechanisms, but they knew one simple thing. It worked, and now, science is beginning to understand why. After everything, boneset never truly disappeared. It did not go extinct. It was not destroyed. It still exists, quietly, in places people no longer pay attention to, along streams, at the edges of forests, in wetland areas, just as it was hundreds of years ago. What disappeared was not the plant, but its place in how we understand medicine. When knowledge is no longer taught, it gradually disappears from practice. When a generation no longer knows it, it becomes a weed, not because it is useless, but because we no longer recognize its value. The story of boneset is not proof that everything old is correct, nor is it a rejection of modern medicine. It simply shows one thing, that some things were once effective, but no longer fit within the current system, and so they were left behind. The question is, how many other weeds are still out there that we do not yet truly understand? If you find this story thought-provoking, please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below, because maybe this is just one of many stories still untold. This video uses AI-assisted tools to help present visual information more clearly and understandably for viewers.